There is a country that woke up one day and discovered it was sitting on top of the largest oil reserve in the world. More than 300 billion barrels, buried right beneath its feet. The experts called it a miracle. The government called it destiny. The people called it the beginning of something great. That was 1976. By 2018, that same country had the fastest shrinking economy on Earth. Surgeons were performing operations by the light of mobile phones because hospitals had no electricity. Children were arriving at clinics so thin that doctors had nothing to offer them except a recommendation to eat more, in a country with more oil than Saudi Arabia. The oil did not disappear. So what did? That is the only question this video exists to answer. To understand what Venezuela did wrong, you need to see what it looked like when things were working. Go back to the 1950s. Caracas is a city people are comparing to Paris. Wide boulevards, new buildings rising every month. A growing middle class with money in their pockets and real choices about how to spend it. Families buying cars. Children going to university. Venezuela at that point is the richest country in Latin America. Not in potential, in reality. That wealth is coming from one place: oil. Foreign companies drilling near Lake Maracaibo, pulling up crude and paying Venezuela royalties for the right to do it. Venezuelan politicians watch a large slice of that profit leave the country for years. By 1976, they decide enough is enough. President Carlos Andrés Pérez announces that Venezuela's oil now belongs to Venezuela. A new state company called PDVSA takes over everything. The wells, the refineries, the pipelines, all of it. The crowd goes wild. This feels like the moment the country finally owns its future. For a while, PDVSA actually runs well. It keeps trained engineers. It invests properly. Production holds. International experts respect it. But something invisible is already shifting underneath the surface. When oil money flows through a private company, that company must be efficient to survive. But when it flows through a government, it becomes the government's budget, its power. The thing that keeps it popular. That shift is quiet in the good years. Venezuela does not notice it yet because prices are high and money is coming in fast. Then, the 1980s arrive, and global oil prices collapse. Venezuela had been spending as though the good years were permanent. It had borrowed against future income. When that income shrinks, the debt stays. The government goes to the IMF and agrees to cut subsidies and raise prices. In February of 1989, public transport prices go up overnight. The next morning, Caracas explodes. People pour into the streets. Shops are looted. The military is called in. Hundreds of people die. Venezuelans call it the Caracazo. The government survives. But the country never forgets what it felt like when the oil money stopped and the people at the bottom paid the price. A young military officer watches all of this and decides that when he has power, things will be different. His name is Hugo Chávez. In 1999, Chávez wins the presidency. Oil prices are rising. The timing feels like fortune. He looks at Venezuela and sees a real problem. The oil wealth is not reaching the people who need it. The gap between the wealthy neighborhoods and the hillside slums of Caracas has been enormous for a long time. So he takes oil money and pours it directly into ordinary lives. Free health clinics open in poor neighborhoods. Literacy programs reach millions. Food is subsidized. Housing is built. The popularity is not manufactured. It is real. But underneath the generosity, 3 decisions are being made that will eventually hollow the country out completely. First, PDVSA's reinvestment budget gets raided. An oil company needs constant maintenance. Wells deteriorate. Refineries need new parts. Pipelines crack over time. Chávez redirects that reinvestment money into social programs. The programs are visible. The crumbling infrastructure is not yet. Second, in 2002, Venezuela's oil workers go on strike. PDVSA's own engineers and managers walk off the job to protest the direction the country is heading. Chávez fires all 18,000 of them. Every engineer, Every technical manager, every person who spent decades learning how that specific infrastructure operates, gone. Replaced with people selected not for what they know about oil, but for whether they are loyal to the revolution. The institutional knowledge of an entire industry disappears in weeks. Third, the whole Venezuelan economy is rebuilt on a single assumption: that oil will always be worth at least $100 a barrel. No savings fund, no economic diversification, no plan for what happens when that assumption breaks. With oil above $100, this feels like confidence rather than recklessness. In the summer of 2014, global oil prices collapse. $100 becomes $80, then $60, then $40. For a diversified economy, this is painful but survivable. For Venezuela, it is like pulling the one thread holding everything together. Revenue drops sharply, but spending does not. Maduro, who took over after Chávez died in 2013, keeps the programs running and the subsidies in place because cutting them means facing the same kind of anger that brought down governments before him. To cover the gap between what comes in and what goes out, the central bank prints money. Prices rise. More money gets printed. Prices rise faster. By 2018, prices are doubling every few weeks. A kilo of rice costs more bolivars in the afternoon than it did that morning. Supermarket shelves go from full to empty. Medicines vanish from pharmacies. 7 million people leave the country, not for opportunity, because they see no version of their life still working inside Venezuela. Here is the part that stays with you. Venezuela still has the oil. The reserves never moved. 300 billion barrels still sit under that ground today. But production collapsed from 3 million barrels a day at its peak to under 700,000 at its lowest point. The engineers who knew how to fix the infrastructure were fired 20 years ago. Most of them now work in oil industries in other countries. Russia and China have moved in with loans that give them claim to large portions of Venezuela's future production in exchange for the cash Maduro needed to survive. The country with the largest oil reserve on Earth is now mortgaging that reserve to foreign governments just to keep the lights on. Venezuela did not run out of oil. It ran out of the ability to turn oil into a country. Every time oil money arrived, the people in charge spent it on today and borrowed against tomorrow. They built loyalty instead of infrastructure. They replaced expertise with obedience. And when the price of oil dropped, nothing underneath the country held it up. The oil was always there. The decisions were the problem. And each decision looked reasonable in the moment it was made, and catastrophic only once it was too late to reverse. If this story changed the way you see a country, not as a headline but as a chain of choices with real consequences, this channel has more exactly like it. Subscribe and stay close. Because the most important part of any collapse is never the moment it becomes visible. It is everything that happened quietly before anyone was watching.